All right. So who we have here on the screen for you is Emmett McBride. He's actually my brother. As you can tell, he's younger, although his hair is kind of my shade almost now. So that's I'm pleased to see that I'm not the only one. Anyway, so I'm going to let him tell you the details of his job, but basically what you should be concerned with as a student, first off and foremost, is that he's somebody that hires people. So he's responsible for hiring people. And that's why I want him to kind of explain what he does and what he's over and, different positions and that kind of thing. So you'll kind of understand that from his point of view, what he's looking for in a potential hiring, what he's wanting out of those people, which hopefully you'll find very beneficial. So I'll turn some time over to him now to kind of describe what he does and different positions that he has to deal with and all that stuff.
All right. So, as James said, I'm Emmett McBride. I'm the Senior Director of Information Technology and Services at Sioux Falls School District. We're a school district of about 25,000 students. We have about 40 campuses across our city. And my team is made up currently of about 35 individuals. We have positions ranging from computer technician to all the way to senior developers and managers. We have some gaps in our current structure. We don't have phone support. We don't have what I call like entry level positions. What most organizations would have, some kind of part-time positions that you would have, where you'd have like student interns or other people working them. We don't have any of those currently, which makes it a little hard for us. But my responsibilities include anything that you can think of when it comes to technology in a school district. So, I mean, you're talking about infrastructure, in-house development, website content, intranet, infrastructure, you name it. Like we cover all of it. We handle the purchasing, scoping, deployment. We don't handle integration or training at this point. We have only got a couple of those trainers in the district. Most organizations our size would have 10 or 12, and I've only got a couple. So we're not currently doing that kind of stuff, but that's usually in this kind of role and in this kind of environment. So, I mean, you name it, we've got it. We probably touch it. It's like a small city here. That's the thing that I never thought of it that way back in the day. I was talking to a resource officer that worked for a school, and he was talking about how people in communities tend to be surprised about the things that happen in schools. Like, oh, I can't believe that would happen at our school. And he's like, well, you live in a town with 5,000 people in it, and people shoplift, right? So you probably have, if you have a school with 4,000 students in it, you probably have some students that don't do the right thing sometimes. So, we are a little bit like that, and we're, we mirror a lot of the culture and climate of our environment. A little bit about our environment: we have 75 different languages spoken in our school district.
Wow.
We have, it's a very diverse community. Sioux Falls has been very accepting of different cultures and climates. A lot of refugees here. When I lived in Arizona, you could look at our demographic chart at Pima, and it was like 40 or 62% white English speaking and whatever percent Spanish, right? Like that was kind of how it rolled. When I lived in Wisconsin, it was white and Southeast Asian Hmong speaking, but it was only about 25% of our student population. And then here, when you look at the demographic chart, Hispanic population or Spanish speaking population still makes up our second largest demographic. It comes out to something like 22% of our population. But overall, our white population only makes up about 51% of our population. The rest of the population is made up with all kinds of diversity, from people from Haitian background, our big population coming in right now are refugees out of Afghanistan and Iraq. So that's a huge influx of population coming in from those countries. And as most people assume, they speak Arabic, and they speak like 5 different languages. So that creates a lot of stuff. But our largest non-Spanish speaking population is actually from Africa. And so we have
Okay.
a lot of African population. And, you know, in Africa, they speak lots of languages because they've been mixed with French and German and British and then their own languages from their own countries. So that's been a really interesting challenge for my team because we don't translate things usually. So
All right. Well, some questions for you.
yeah,
Did you earn a college degree?
I did earn a college degree. I didn't. I did start my career in technology before I completed my first college degree, and I don't think that that's uncommon, but I don't think it's super common. If you look across my team here that I employ, there's probably 2 or 3 out of the 30 that started working in technology without a degree. And usually they had some kind of certification or some other kind of credential that got them into it. But yeah, I did that. I was kind of in that track. I started taking college classes at Eastern Arizona College, and I got some certifications while I was in those courses. And then I got a job working in technology and education. And with that, and of course, continued my degree path at EAC, completed that degree path. And then a few years later, went on to a Western Governors University to get my bachelor's, and then got my master's from Pepperdine University in California after that. I would imagine a lot of my team here, whenever we hire, they ask the question like, well, is the degree more important? Is the certification more important? Is this, you know, their job history more important? And I think that question gets answered with yes, right? Like the answer is yes. Like it depends on where they are in their career, which one matters more, you know? So if I'll use an example of my last lead network guy in my previous organization, he had been in the military for 20 years. He had all of the military training that comes with that. He had all the certifications that he could get through those military training, and he'd worked in networking and communications with the military doing stuff that I can't even imagine doing. And so when somebody like that applies, you don't go, oh, you 20 years of engineering and network experience in 3 different continents. Oh, you don't have a bachelor's degree? I don't know. I don't think we'll interview them. Like that's just stupid, right? Like that's a dumb hiring practice. On the flip side, if I get somebody that applies and they've got almost no experience or low experience and they've got some certification, that's probably going to get them, you know, an interview. If they have a degree, that's probably going to get them to an interview. If they don't have something like that and they have no experience, you're not even, I'm not going to look at them. Now, right now is kind of the employee market, meaning that the unemployment is so low in technology that you might interview them just because you've only got 5 applicants for a position. But that's not always the case. You know, to compare that, I've just in the last 18 months, I've hired a systems engineer on one end, I've hired an infrastructure manager, and I've hired building technicians. And those entry level side of the coin, those building technician positions, I've always had 30 to 40 applicants. And out of those 30 to 40 applicants, probably 50% of them have a degree at some level, at a minimum, an associate's. Many of them had a bachelor's degree, and quite a few of them had 1 or 2 years of experience. And I mean, our organization probably gets a little bit of that because our pay scales are good, but generally that's a fairly competitive market, that entry level world, right? When you go up the channel, lots of people kind of cap out and don't continue their skill growth. And so the number of people that are competing for those jobs drops. And so that continued growth in your career is important. You know, if you want to move up in pay or responsibility, you're going to have to keep doing that stuff. So yeah, all of them are important, but it's different for what role or where you are. And the more of them you have, the better off you are at getting getting into the interview. It's not going to change the fact that you can interview poorly, but
Yeah, yeah, and since you mentioned that, what do you look for? Like when you give them the opportunity to interview and they come in and they're sitting down, I'm imagining you guys probably do things like most places where there's actually not just you, but there's a few people there, a team of people. What are you watching for? What are you looking at?
yeah, so you're right. We always have a team. That's a requirement for everywhere I've worked in education. Almost always requires some kind of cross collaboration. So we usually, for like a building technician, we would have a building level administrator in there. We'd have a peer of that role in that interview. We'd have myself and we'd have their direct supervisor in that interview. So there are usually going to be 4 people at a minimum in the interview. And then we're going to have some technical questions, but we're going to probably assume that most of your technical expertise has been met by your credential. So if you come in with an associate's degree from an accredited institution, or you have some kind of certification or whatever that can show that you have certain technical knowledge or skills or experience that meets those requirements, we're not going to spend most of our interview asking you about, well, how do you do this kind of process and how do you do that kind of process, because our institution and the way that we deploy our equipment, the way we handle that is going to be specific to our institution. There's going to be underlying ideas and practices that are consistent, but we're not going to get into that nitty gritty. We're not going to have you do like a troubleshooting technique or anything like that to see your technical skills. We're going to look at those. That's going to come in with the credentials. We'll have a few of them just to double check to see if you were really good in class, but you never learned anything. We'll do that kind of spot checking a little bit to double check it, but we're not going to have, out of 20 questions, you're going to have like 3 or 4 that are going to be technical related. The rest of the questions are going to be things like, how do you deal with a customer when they have this? They might even have a scenario. They might be saying, you had a customer, they came in, or that they have a question, you've troubleshot it, you realize that the issue is actually the user's doing it wrong. Explain to us how you tell the user that they're doing it wrong. Right?
Yeah.
Because most of what we do is customer service based work and it's people based work. I mean, we get to play with really cool toys, but we work with people a lot to make sure their stuff gets done. We're going to have questions about working in a team. We're going to have questions about how do you find answers when you don't know the answer. And, we're looking for things like, I know how to use the internet to get my resources. I know how to reach out to my peers, and I have a network of other experts that I maybe can get my information from. And the reality is we can teach almost anybody hard skills. Like most people in the world are intelligent enough to learn the hard skills. The thing that's hard to teach is the ability to work well with other people and be successful working in an environment. Most tech jobs are really independent work, meaning that your supervisor is not going to be hanging around over your shoulder. So we want to know that you can handle yourself when things go south and you're stuck in a high school with 1,700 kids and 150 teachers and the internet went down and you're the first person they're going to call. And how are you going to handle that situation? We want to know that you can handle that kind of pressure, and that you're not going to be concerned or scared, in those kinds of social situations. Those are big things for us. And that goes up through the channel, right? Because if you're going to be a leader or a manager, you're just on the other end of that situation.
Yeah. So if in thinking about the people that walk through the door in that first moment of the interview, what stands out to you the most? Like, there's always these things that influence people, we all gain first impressions. As soon as somebody comes through the door, you're building an impression of them. And obviously in the interview, you can overcome a bad impression when you walk through the door. But it's also good to know, for most of my students won't have really gone through a legitimate interview. You know, they've probably done interviews where the store really needs somebody, or they really need somebody to do the burgers. And so the interviews in those are a lot different. I mean, they're looking at whether or not you can follow some instructions and learn some stuff. But that person walks through the door. What are you hoping to see in just the first few minutes of them coming through the door and sitting down?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you bring that up because um, I've done a lot of interviews pre-COVID, during COVID, and after COVID. And I think that some of what I've looked for has changed a little bit. Pre-COVID, everything was done face to face, right? Everything was, you came in, it's really common to come in and shake hands, kind of get to know everybody like that. And then during COVID, it was very virtual. You're sitting in an interview like this. And I mean, we did interviews with people where they like had note cards off screen, they have like a notebook and they're hiding it down here and they're like trying to look up answers for stuff. And then after COVID, some of the more social norms that come in and shake a hand and whatever, some of that stuff's kind of gone by the wayside a little bit because of the just the change in our society that's related to it. But things that you notice right away is when do they show up early or on time, right? Like you notice real quick if the person shows up and it's like 30 seconds before their interview time, or worse, they show up 4 minutes after they're supposed to have arrived, or they went to the wrong building even though you gave them very specific instructions on where to get there and where to park. That you notice that stuff, and the minute you walk into the door of a building for an interview, your interview started. That's something that I don't think people recognize a lot, is that the person that greets you at the front desk is part of the interview. They're going to give feedback to the interview team about how the person came in. Were they friendly? Did they make good small talk? Did they sit there and just look like they were scared to death that they were about to get interviewed? Something that I think is important, that I'm not sure that is a first impression, but I think it helps for your first impression, is to know a little bit about the organization. Like, know a little bit about the culture and climate of where you're going. I've told the story over the years about one of my first IT job interviews, and I showed up looking like this, suit and tie, which I think is very professional, right? But I didn't know the organization I was interviewing for was very casual. And I went into the interview, and like the manager was wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and he looked at me with like the level of disdain, like I was kind of presumptuous in the way that I was presenting myself. The reality is that you can make up for that kind of stuff through your interview, right? But you're not going to make up for it on the other end. I had a guy come to an interview with a Budweiser t-shirt on to a school. You can't even smoke or drink within a block of a school. Why would you show up with a Budweiser t-shirt to your interview? Right? So you got to think about that kind of stuff. Like, what does it say about me, and what does it say about what I'm going to become? And then when you come in, you've got to be, you got to be friendly, talk to the people, say hi, watch for the norms, right? If people get up from their chairs and come over to introduce themselves, make sure you engage with them. Don't just sit down and not engage, but you're looking for those kind of cues to see how comfortable they are in their own skin, and what how well they feel like they're going to do when they get in there. The other thing that you notice really quick is, having done lots of these interviews over the year, is you can tell if somebody doesn't know what they're talking about. Like, more words doesn't make it better. So just be polished and take your time to, there's plenty of stuff on the internet where you can read about common questions you get asked. I made fun of this stuff when I was younger, like, oh, go and do a practice interview with your wife or in front of your mirror or with your mom or whatever. Totally do that. Like, don't just show up for your first interview and not have gone through that stuff, because the more you do it, the better you get at it, right? That's just the reality of it. And I'm looking for some comfort level with that kind of situation, because everything that you do in technology is people coming and asking you questions and looking for good answers or a positive attitude and those kinds of things. And they're going to have the same kind of first interaction with you. Every time you have a new user come to you, they're interviewing you for your job. And how you respond in those first few seconds is going to make a huge difference on whether they're going to believe that you can help them going forward.
Yeah, and I think that's, if you haven't done an interview right, that's probably the scariest thing for anybody to get used to. One of the things I mentioned that, we're going back way at the beginning of the course, but one of the things I mentioned in one of the videos I do is that apply for jobs. And even if you're not interested in getting that, if they give you an interview, just go to it. Just go and do it. And I put that in there because I wish I had done that. I wish I had done that because when I go into an interview that I really care about, I was caught off guard. I was flustered at, oh, this is so important to me. This is something I really want. And I thought back to, I probably should have applied for some jobs that I really didn't care about, just so I can be in the situation. One of the things that I see that I really dislike in interviews, right? Like you said, questions are out there. You can go out and look on the internet and get used to these weird, silly questions that they're going to ask you, but they're asking you for a reason. And I hate when they avoid the question. And that's because I assume they can't keep track of what the question was. So you ask them this question, and then they go blah 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 blah, and they never answer the question. And honestly, for me, I usually never, when they say, "Did that answer the question?" I usually don't answer that back to them because I'm like, "No, it didn't. I'm not going to tell you that. I'm just did not answer the question. That's what I'm going to write down." Because it's important, even though you're freaked out. If you have to, and this is very smart, I've seen people do this. Is it okay if I write down the questions so that they jot something down, and that's forcing them to slow their brain down and think about what they were just asked, instead of just trying to shoot off the cuff because they're nervous, never getting to the answer of anything. And then you're like, I don't know if they can deal with whatever we just asked them because they never answered that question. They just avoided it.
Yeah, I think that's important. And I think a skill that's useful in technology is always restating stuff to the user, back to them. So if somebody comes to you and asks you something, you always confirm, right? Mirror and confirm. And using that same tactic or skill in your interview is helpful. So if you asked me the question, what's your current responsibility at your job? And for some reason I'm super nervous and I can't remember that question, right? I should repeat back to you. I want to make sure I'm answering you correctly. What you're looking for is what my current role is, what my responsibilities are, so then that way you start to lay out a pattern of answer, how you want to lay out your answer to them. And sometimes people ask very vague questions. They'll ask you questions intentionally designed to get you to think about your interpretation. I'll give an example. When I interviewed for a job that was similar to this role that I have now, somebody asked, give me an example or a time where you deployed a large technology system. Well, what is the interpretation of a technology system? Are they talking about enterprise like ERP systems, HR finance, right? Are they talking about student data? Are they talking about like network infrastructure? What are they looking for in that question? And it's not inappropriate to turn it back around and go, you're asking this question. Are you asking about this, or this? Now they might say yes, right? Because they don't know. They found the question on a website, thought it looked good.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times, especially as you move up in your career and you're going to, like, I don't interview with tech people very often. When I've interviewed for my roles, I interview with superintendents, and they might have a technician or an engineer in the interview, but they're not the one that maybe wrote the questions. And so they got these questions from somewhere, some consulting firm gave them to them. They don't even know what the right answer might be, and so you have to make sure that you do exactly like you said. take time, don't answer right away. Think about what you're doing. If you need to write it down, restate it if you need to do it, and then answer the question. Now, you don't want to be like some people. I've had people that write down and it's like an awkward 3 minutes, and then they give you like a 2-sentence answer, and you're like, what in the world just happened? You don't want to do that either, but you've got to make sure that you're answering the questions that they're asking. You can't talk around in circles about things and then hope that you got it. And I will tell you something that is a bigger concern, I think, today than it's ever been in the process of hiring, is just where people are in their acceptance of diversity in our workplaces. Like whether we agree or don't agree with like the extremes of those kinds of things, there's likely to be questions that are related to that kind of topic, and what they're looking for is a willingness to work with anyone. That's what they want to know. That's what they're looking for, right? But if you think you're going to go find a job where they don't ask a question like that nowadays, it's going to be pretty rare, right? Like,
well, let's because we're hitting pretty heavy on the interviews. We could keep going on with that. That's for sure. Because there's that's like almost a rabbit hole, because interviews can be so different and dynamic. I would just mention in closing of the interviews that part of what they're trying to do is look for a personality fit of, is this person gonna work with this little team, right? So how many students do you serve?
We just under 25,000.
And yet that's going to come back to a small set of individuals that have to work together.
Right.
So if they're not going to get along with the 3 or 4 people that they intensively work with, that's going to be a problem.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that you're 100% right. And that I am looking for that fit, right? I'm looking for, what do you bring that I don't have on my team? And how do you fit in that team? So I need you to fit well, and I need you to have skills and abilities that maybe the rest of my team's not going to have. And obviously a lot of that's laid out in the job description, but you got to be conscious of that they're looking for that work, that ability to work with others.
Okay, well, I'm going to just say this. You've been very successful in your career to get to where you are. So where did you start? And what did that progression look like? And then ultimately, what do you think built that success?
So first and foremost, I'll say my career path isn't dissimilar to a lot of people that are my age in my era of technology. I don't think that it's very common to get into the career like I did now. I think that the industry is much more established, but I started because a school district had problems with their technology and somebody needed to come and fix them, right? And so I got my first role actually was at Safford Schools, and they'd had somebody get injured. I think you knew about it. Some people got connected to me through that, and they were like, "When can you start?" Right. So I came on there as a temporary employee, worked there, I think maybe 6 to 7 months or something like that before that position was opened for hire. I applied for it, didn't get it, got beat out by somebody else. And subsequently, I started doing some freelance work for Solomon Schools at the time, just doing tech support for them, due to the fact that people at Safford knew people at Solomon, and they kind of gave me a reference to go and help them out. While I was doing that, I happened to run into somebody at the El Charro in Safford, and they said, "Oh, you work in tech," and my husband works in tech, and we're going to be moving. We're going to go to Utah to go to school or whatever. And he has this job over at Pima Schools. So I talked to that person and asked him about it. And he's like, "Well, I'm not leaving until July or whatever date it was." And so it was a ways out. So I just kind of put it on the back burner. And then a few weeks later, the assistant principal ran into me, it's a small town. So ran into me and was like, "Hey, you know tech stuff. Come down on Monday or Tuesday and let's talk about what you might be able to do. I know this other guy's leaving in a while, and let's see what we can do to maybe you might be interested in this. So I went down to the school and brought my stuff. This is a smart thing. If somebody invites you to talk about a job, they're interviewing you. So show up like you're coming to an interview. Don't like come from your workout and think you're just coming for like a social event, right? If somebody asks you to come down to talk about a job, you're getting interviewed, whether it's official or not. So I walked in, he took me in to meet with the principal, who was the supervisor of that role at the time, and sat me down. And within a few seconds, he says, "This is our new guy." Just points at me and goes, "This is our new guy. So what do you think?" And I was like, "Whoa, wait a minute. Like, what's going on?" I haven't even, but I was pretty interested in getting a good job, you know, and a good opportunity. So in the end, I got into that job. And so I was hired as a computer technician for Pima Schools. What was this, back in 2003, I think. And they didn't have anybody else. So that job quickly started out as like, make our computers work. And then soon it was like, you know, it was like, do you know anything about Exchange? Do you know anything about, and I was lucky enough to have, you know, you worked in the industry. I had other friends that worked in the industry. I got connected kind of with the local community of tech people and started learning as much as I could. And I'm a pretty like self-starter, go-getter kind of person. And so I kept just looking for things to fix and improve because, I mean, I hate to say it this way, but one of the benefits of most tech people is they tend to want to work smarter, not harder. And that's a key aspect to what I think my success was early on in my career. Was we had a system called Power School. It's a student information system, and the thing ran on a really cruddy piece of equipment. And every morning you had to be at work at like 6:30 to restart this thing because it wouldn't work properly through the day if you didn't. So one of my first tasks was, I'm not coming to work at 6:30 in the morning just to reset this piece of equipment. I'm going to get this fixed and I'm going to fix it right. So I started to learn as much as I could about anything I could. I went from working there, I think I was working part-time at first to full-time. That was the first thing that they did after I'd been there probably a month. Then about a month later, they offered me more money. Then because of the work I'd done there and the connections I made in the community, Richie Gann over at Fort Thomas at the time knew that I knew how to do some stuff with imaging, invited me over to do some contract work for them, got to know their superintendent. And he was like, "Well, you should come work over here with Richie." Well, everybody in town knows everybody. So that superintendent talks to my superintendent, is like, "I'm going to take your tech guy. You don't pay him very well. He's like, we really like him." So all of a sudden I got a raise, you know. And so they were really good at letting me kind of take on risk. And the industry, I feel like, was still in its late stages, right, of growth. So that gave me the opportunity to take some risks that probably today I wouldn't take because the industry is more established. But that made it so I could work up and go to school and do all of those things at once and kind of take on any kind of crazy thing that I wanted. Oh, let's do a network redesign, or let's do a whatever. Well, who's going to do it? Well, I'm the only one here, so I'm gonna figure it out and learn it. So it gave me a lot of opportunity to try a lot of things. I was fortunate when I was at Pima that I connected with a lot of tech people in the area, because when an opportunity came open at the city of Safford, I was able to go and get that job and move from, because at Pima I was just still a computer technician, right? And whether we want to believe it or not, even though my scope and scale of my work was really broad, it's hard to get a job as a network engineer if you've never been a network engineer. And so because people knew me, though, I was able to go over there and be a network engineer. I also lucked out in the fact that the person that replaced me at Pima didn't want to stay and left kind of suddenly. And the superintendent called me. Well, two things. The superintendent, when I left, was like, "Hey, if you leave, I don't blame you because we don't pay you very well, and you should have probably been paid even better. But mark my words, someday they're going to ask you to come back here and name your price, right? So I left, and it was maybe 9 months later, I got a call from the superintendent down there, and he said, "Can you come down and help us? This other person's, not left, but was probably going to leave." So I went down and fixed a bunch of stuff a couple days in a row, and I went back to just kind of, this is something I learned early on in my career. If somebody asks you to take care of something, always return to them and let them know that you completed it. Don't just leave it fixed. Always tell the person that you fixed it, and also tell your supervisors how you're doing and where you are on what you're doing. Nobody needs to be hounding you to get your stuff done, right? But if you do it all and you keep it working, but nobody ever knows you did any of it, that might be the mark of a great IT person, that everything works and you're kind of invisible like the Wizard of Oz. But you also, people start to wonder, what do we pay that person to do?
Yeah.
So you need to be, so I went and did I returned to this guy and said, "Here's the stuff that we talked about getting done." And after I talked about it, he's like, "I guess you're here to you're telling me this because you know that this person quit. And we want you to, we would really like you to come back full time." And I said, "Well, here's what I need. I want to be the tech director instead of, because I'm running this whole place. Like,
Yeah.
it's not fair. It's not fair to call me the computer technician and pay me like a computer technician, but have me doing all the work of a tech director." So they did that. They gave me a good raise, and then that superintendent did something that I didn't at the time recognize as a huge benefit to me, but was, because I was called the tech director, he made me go to all of the things that tech directors should go to. So, I had to sit in administrative meetings. I had to go to Arizona law conferences. I had to do all of those things that probably, for the size of district we were unnecessary for me to have actually participated in. But it made me a better employee for the district, and it helped me be ready for my career. Subsequently, later in that same role, another superintendent came to me and said, why haven't you finished your bachelor's degree? You're limiting your capacity and impact for organization because you haven't improved your skill set." So they kind of pushed me to improve that. And I know it made a big impact in their organization. It also made it possible for me to leave that organization. So good leadership knows that professional growth is going to bring them value, but they also know that they might lose you. Bad leadership knows professional growth will lead to the possibility of you leaving, and they won't give it to you, right?
Yeah.
So you have to watch for that a little bit. But so I got that stuff, and then something that goes a little bit back to what we were previously talking to: don't limit yourself to where you apply, how you apply, what you're looking for, because you don't know what somebody else might see in you or your capacity and what you can do. So I worked at Pima Schools at the time. We had like 500 students. I applied for jobs all over the country for tech director jobs. I interviewed all over different places. I interviewed in California, Missouri, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Indiana, and Wisconsin. Those were the places I interviewed. I interviewed for this job in Wisconsin that was 10 times larger, than the school I was coming from. And I thought, well, I applied for that. I'm sure, yeah, right. I did, and I got the interview, and then subsequently got that job. And again, had an opportunity to do new things that I couldn't have ever imagined that I would have ever got to do. While I was there, though, use your thinker and take your opportunities, right? And I took that opportunity to continue my education and get my master's degree at the time. I was there for almost 8 years, and kind of felt like I had done everything I was going to get done there, and it was kind of going to just be a rinse and repeat kind of scenario. And I started to get a little bit of an itch to get out of there. And so I applied a bunch of places, and again, applied for this job here, 4 times larger than the place I was before, and thought, I'll throw my name in there. It's probably not very likely. And ended up coming and getting this job and working here. So, if you look through those things, you have professional coaching, right, from other leadership that impacted me in a positive way. And if that doesn't exist in the job that you have to go out and find it. That's something that I learned in this particular role that I'm in now. Because we're so large, you can get coaching from a lot of people, but if you want a mentor, you got to go find one and get one. And then you have the, personal professional stuff, getting those certifications and those degrees along the way, looking at like, where am I? What's going to help me do my job better? What's going to help me do my job better in the future? Where are my weaknesses? So for instance, I got my associate's degree in information system support, or whatever EAC called it at the time. And then I got my bachelor's in IT. And so I would have a strong experience in technology, lots of certification in technology. I work in education primarily. I think this is my 20-some year in education. I better know learning as well as I know technology. If you're going to work in an industry, you need to know the industry. That mentality in the world that you can get an MBA and you can do anything, you can manage anything if you have an MBA. It's just not true. Like, you have to know the core business. So I got my master's in learning and technology to make up those weaknesses, and to give myself more credibility when you sit around the table with a bunch of people with PhDs and literacy and all kinds of things. You need to have some kind of credential that gives you credibility. So that kind of led me through that. I'm not sure this will be the end of my journey. I mean, I know probably a lot of people would be like, yeah, I made it here, right? Like I could ride this for the rest of my career. It pays well and whatever, but I'm not sure that I'm done with that journey yet.
Well, since you brought it up, what's your pay range? In these interviews, we're not going to ask anybody exactly what they make, because that's just not right. But
Yeah.
if you were to give a range, like, hey, I fall within this area, so that the students can know, oh, okay, so after this amount of time, this is what he's making, and they can kind of plan that out.
So you could, I mean, just so all of your students know, if you ever want to know a pay range of a publicly funded organization's jobs, you can get them. They're posted on the websites. In fact, you can find my job description on the website with its pay range attached to it right now. And if you really want to get nitpicky, you can probably find the board packet with my job approval and my pay on there, like, because I work for a public institution. That's not the case for a lot of jobs in the world, though. So my pay range here at Sioux Falls, if I remember right, because it's changed since I started here, I believe it starts at 135. That's 135,000 and goes to 170. And then if you've been here for 10 years or more, you go so you can move across that, right, during your 10 years. And at 10 years, you jump to, I think it's 177 or 180, something like that. And then that's it. You can't go any higher in that role. Now, those ranges are adjusted and negotiated with over time, right? So when I started, I think it was 132 to 165 or something. And then just in the last 2 years, it's gone up that much. Now that depends on the economy, because I was at Pima Schools for 15 years, and my pay went from like 35,000 to like 70,000, and then it stayed at 70,000 for like most of the time I was there, because the economy tanked and there was no money.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, that's the range I'm in now. I'll tell you, just to put it in perspective, that's not a norm. Sioux Falls pays quite well for the industry. If you look at my size of organization in K-12 across the country, you'll find positions with the same scale and range, but you're most likely to find those in places like Massachusetts, New York, Connecticut, California, those kinds of areas of the country, because they have cost of living changes. Most positions like mine, like if I was in the same role in Wisconsin, it would probably be like 130 to 150, right? So you're going to see some variance in that, just because of, they know it's really hard to convince somebody to move to the middle of South Dakota. So they have pretty good pay here.
It's a beautiful state.
If you love the sky, you'll love South Dakota.
You get a ton of sky.
Ton of sky.
Yeah, I want to just mention, you mentioned that the industry was just kind of starting out then, as you're looking for people to kind of partner with, to be mentors with, to learn from. And I don't know if I mentioned it in this class. I mentioned it in one of my classes that, when I was trying to learn uh, IP networking, right, there was no books on it. There was no internet pages that talked about it or how to get it done. It was my internet service provider, who was a good friend, that taught me what I needed to know from them. Now that's changed a lot, right? The internet has just boomed. And so now we have students that, yeah, if it was me, if I was doing it, I would be looking for those personal connections, because as you just described, a lot of those personal connections led to other things. And if you hadn't made them, then they wouldn't have led anywhere, right? So I would stress that to students. You may not be the most outgoing person in the world, but you want to try to find those people that can teach you things and things that you can help them with, and you can partnership in that. But you also have the internet, and you can go and look up just about whatever you want and learn from experts that are nowhere near you. But you do lose that ability to gain something from the networking. And so I think when I look at people across their careers, I think one thing that stifles people's careers is they themselves pigeonhole themselves, right? They do, this is what I do every single day. And for a while, they're happy with that because it's very comfortable. And there's a lot to learn within any area. And so they're comfortable, let me just do that. And then they don't really go outside of that little groove to talk to anybody else. And then later on, they complain about being pigeonholed. And it's really like, you did that to yourself. You could have gone to a state training, right? I mean, most places, does where you work, do you actually say, hey, why don't you go to this conference or that conference? Do you guys promote that?
Yeah, not only do we promote it, the state of South Dakota has a very um, collaborative environment for IT professionals, public private. So the state of South Dakota has a very, very good IT department in the state, one of the best. They're nationally recognized for their cybersecurity and those kinds of things. So they host events constantly, cybersecurity events, new technology events. They bring in vendors. They do all kinds of opportunity like that. And I'm constantly telling my team, hey, this might be really interesting for you. This might be something that's of value to you. And I'm going to tell you, I've got team members that they go to every one of those. And then I've got other ones that are like, oh, I already know about that. I read all about it. And you're correct in saying that you do pigeonhole yourself, because the world isn't as big as people think it is. And what I mean by that is when I went from Pima, Arizona to Wisconsin, I didn't know anybody in Wisconsin. Nobody that I worked with, my superintendent through, knew where Pima, Arizona was. Now, with that said, my first few months there, I was talking to the superintendent, and we were chatting about why they took the risk on me for that job. But then she was part of a consortium of schools called the League of Innovative Schools, and it's not super exclusive, but you do have to get nominated to be in it, and then you have to do some application processes. And so she was part of this, and they were looking for a member to bring on a new member from the Southwest. And she goes, do you know Cal Baker, the superintendent of Vale School District? And I said, yes, I've met Cal Baker a few times. And so between her and I, we connected with him, and he remembered who I was, and they were able to talk about that, right? And then when I came to this district, my superintendent interviewed me here, and I could have swore I knew her, like I'd met her somewhere, but I hadn't. We talked about that during the interviews, but she knew my superintendent, right? And so you don't know who knows who. So another good example of that is I had two technology integrators that were exceptional integrators in Wisconsin, nationally recognized in the K-12 environment for their integration work. They presented at a project-based conference on how to use Canvas for project-based learning. And the superintendent of Pima Schools was there and went to their event because they were so highly regarded. And when he got there and realized they were my employees, he texted me and was like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe you're still impacting us through this," right? So you just don't know like the world that you're connected to.
Yeah.
And if you don't make those connections, you're going to get yourself kind of locked into, this is what you do, this is what you're stuck doing.
Yeah. Those are good examples. Well, is there anything you would add? Because our conversation's going on here, and most people don't know, but we could sit here and talk for about 3 or 4 hours about whatever. So is there anything that you would add to somebody who's starting out? So from your position, yeah, I'm looking at these people that are coming out of programs like this, and I may be interviewing people like this. What would you have them know as they're in their first semester of college?
I think the thing that I would tell them is, when you think of technology, don't think of only the things that you can learn through your degree program. And what I mean by that is that you have every kind of job in technology. There are sales positions, there's training positions, there are technical positions, there's technical support, there's deployment, there's engineering, you name it, you can do it. So, and then there's every industry in the world uses it. So, if you have an affinity, I'm just making stuff up at this point, but if you have an affinity for cars, but you don't want to go and work on cars all day, that doesn't mean you can't work in the auto industry through technology. A great example of that is every school district, every college and university in the world has a learning management platform today. I believe you guys use Canvas there, and it's from Instructure. So I recently met with a team from Instructure because we're looking at changing our platform. And you've got 5 people there from Instructure. One of them was a principal that now is a trainer for technology, right? One of them was a technology person that's now a salesperson for Instructure. One of them was a software developer that still does software development, but does sales engineering. They're on the side of, what do you need it to do to get that done? And so there's just so much diversity in the industry that, it's not like, oh, I'm going to be a tech support person for 15 years of my life or 25 years of my life. I'm going to be here's my track. Emmett was a technician, and then an engineer, and then a whatever, and then a manager, and then a director. And that's the track. That's what's out there. That's just not true, right? The reality is there's just so much opportunity in it that that you could even argue that the skill sets that you gain from going through an IT track make it possible for you to do almost anything else. One of my own employees worked at the Safford Hospital as a computer support person, right? Doing support for, I think, their medical software. I stole him from them, brought him to Wisconsin, put him in mobile device management and integration, and got him certified in all this different stuff. He finished a bachelor's degree in IT, and now he's like a few months away from being a medical doctor. And one of the things so when he applied for medical school, he had to do all of these things to get in, and you have to get letters of recommendation or whatever. But one of the things that the medical school that he applied to did is they contacted his previous employer, and they asked questions about like skill sets and things that they had. So I had the opportunity to talk to one of their people, and the person told me that one of the reasons that this person was a finalist is because they understood technology and they'd worked with children.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was interesting because at that point, you don't know what kind of doctor you're going to be. For whatever reason, in their process of looking at their application pool, they were like, wow, this person has a broad set of skills in this area, but they've also worked with special needs kids and all of these things through their job. And that means they probably have bedside manner and they can learn really technical things.
Yeah.
And so you just don't pigeonhole yourself by getting caught up in this thing where it's like, well, I read online that there's a bunch of jobs in, DevOps. So I'm going to be a DevOps guy, or I read about database engineers that make a lot of money. I've got 4 full stack developers, and probably 70% of their job is database work, right? but they're full stack developers, and they get to do all kinds of other stuff mixed in with it. So
Yeah.
it's just such a broad industry that I think too many people are like, oh, I'm going to go do this thing, and that's what you're going to do. And that's just not how it works. Shoot, you can teach, right? Like, that's the other side of it. And right now, if you looked in South Dakota, there's probably 9 career and tech ed teaching jobs for computer science or IT that we just can't fill. And the requirement for those kinds of jobs is that you have degrees in those areas. It's great if you happen to have a teaching degree too, but we need you to know that you can teach the other stuff, right? So there's just so much opportunity in it. Don't get caught up on the one thing.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And I would ask the class, but they're not here, if there's any other questions. But is there anything that you want to add before we finish up?
No, I mean, don't be. The other thing I would say is the world is so much smaller than it's always been. You can talk to anybody anywhere in the world almost instantaneously. So the thing that I think that sometimes we get caught up in is, where are you going to live, right? Like there are 2 things I'll say. Where am I going to live is overly concerned. Like, people get way too concerned about that. Travel is so much easier than it ever has been. And communication and connectivity is better than it's ever been. And so especially in your early career, don't be like, oh, I got to live right next to my brother, because if I move, I'll never come back. And it's like, you don't have any clue where you're going to be in 30 years. Like, don't do what's best for your family for certain, right? But make sure that you don't limit your opportunity because of that. And then the other thing that I think people get caught up in, and it started to slip my mind, but is just don't limit yourself into thinking what is the right kind of job for you. Like, so I see this a lot with young people, even with people that have worked here for quite a few years. I have a lot of people that get the job they've had, and they've had it for 15 years, and they start to get to that point where they're like, oh, maybe I should try something else. I'm getting kind of tired of this. And the thing that I hear a lot is, oh, I found this job and it looks perfect for me. I applied for this job. I think I'm going to get it. I got an interview for that job and I think it went well. I'm going to get it. Well, in that time frame, the average time to apply to the time to hire can be between 1 and 6 months. And it's about for every $10,000 you make, it's about a month for that $10,000 for a job, to find a job in that field. So if you do that, you say, I'm going to apply for this job because it's the perfect job for me in the perfect town with the perfect thing, and you put all your eggs in that basket, how many jobs opened and closed before you got told no? And I see it all the time, that people get caught up. They applied for 2 or 3 jobs, and then they get an interview for one of the 3 jobs, and they stop applying for jobs, or they stop searching or looking. And then they're like, oh, it didn't work out 4 months later.
Yeah.
And they've missed out on 25 openings.
Yeah.
That may have been, some of those might have been better for them, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, no, it's until you have an offer, every time you're applying every day, you're checking every day, and you're applying every day. And unless you're really not looking, right? Like, that's the thing that's a question like when family members or other people come to me and they say, well, I'm looking for a job and whatever. And if I ask them, how many jobs you applied for this week? And they say, I found this job, the perfect job, and I applied for it, and I'm waiting to hear back on it. That's the one you've applied for. You're not really looking.
Yeah.
Right. If you're really looking, you've applied to a job almost every day for that over that time.
Yeah. And, you know, that brings a thought to my mind of the fact that on the other side of it, right? So when you're building a resume, you're trying to figure out what to put in there that's going to make you stand out. But on the other side of it, a lot of what's put in there is not put in by somebody that's directly associated with that job. And I've seen that from our side of it. And I look at what's in a job posting and I'm going, well, they actually need about 40 other things that aren't listed here, and they don't even need these 20. And that happens a lot. And so if you make an assumption based on, well, this is what they put in there, and I don't want to do that, or I don't like these 5 things that they said, or I don't have experience in those 5 things, then you're really limiting yourself doubly, because you don't know that you might like it. And secondly, maybe it's a little misinformation. Maybe they didn't really understand that, for instance, that piece of software has been totally retired, but it's still on the list. So
Well,
they put it down. And so
that's a
you
really
really have to
important thing.
broaden out and be a little more open to what you see and just give it a shot. Just give
Yeah,
it a
and
shot.
you're 100% right, because I didn't mention this in my career path, but when I applied for the job at DC Everest in Wisconsin, the job posting required a master's degree, a state of Wisconsin administration certificate, and and I didn't have a master's degree, and I didn't have a state of Wisconsin administration certificate. In fact, I'm not even able to get one, because you have to have taught for 5 years to get an administrative certificate there. And so when I applied, it's like you don't know what they're going to look at and value more than maybe something they already put on there.
Yeah.
It's and some places in the country are better at that. So like because I've done this a few times around, you'll see places like California, and it seems like the Northeast is really good at this. They'll put in their descriptions things like, we're looking for a master's degree and 2 years, or we're looking for a bachelor's in 5 years, or any combination of experience and whatever, right? So they can give themselves a big window of applicants. Some places will not do that, but they are thinking that way.
Yeah.
But if you don't apply, then they'll just you'll never even know, right?
Yeah.
So like that's a really good point to bring up. I've seen a lot of people over the years that don't get the job they probably could have got, that it's better for them because they limit themselves in those ways. And it's disheartening to think that people would do that. But the other thing is don't underestimate the power of your community. And what I mean is, like, anybody around you that knows somebody that knows somebody. I'm not going to tell you, like, if I've only met you once, I'm not going to give you a recommendation, right, for a job, but I might tell you about a job I know about.
Yeah.
And sometimes that makes all the difference. I mean, that's how I found this job. A
Yeah.
friend of mine lived here and was like, "Hey, you should check out this job." So, but yeah, I could talk to you guys about this for a long time. I'm pretty passionate about the industry and like the world, what we're able to do and impact our society for the better. But I'm always open to answering anybody's questions. So, somebody's got a question they want to ask, feel free to ask. And that normally I would have come out to visit around this time of year, but that hasn't happened. So
Yeah. Maybe next fall.
maybe
Or maybe in the
yeah, I don't
spring.
know.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much. It's been very informative. And for the students that are watching this, in the assignment, you'll see a space to basically put any questions down that you might have wanted to ask that didn't get answered here. You don't have to have those. I don't want students thinking, oh, I better put something there. You don't have to have those. But if you did have a question you wanted answered, please put it down there and I'll pass it along to him. And yeah, we'll get something set up. Well, thank you very much, Emmett McBride. And thanks for the students to stick with this video that I know has gone on a little longer than most. And we'll talk with you later.